Have you ever felt that persistent, silent frustration when you see others getting ahead while you remain stuck? Despite your talents, your dedication, your hard work, something always seems to get in the way. People who appear less deserving rise to positions of influence. Those who break the rules thrive while you follow them and struggle. Perhaps you've tried to explain this as bad luck. Maybe you've blamed the system or told yourself that virtue will eventually be rewarded. And so time passes, watching opportunities slip through your fingers, settling for less than you deserve, clinging to principles that the world itself doesn't honor. But what if I told you that your powerlessness is not inevitable? What if I told you that it stems not from a lack of ability, but from a fundamental misunderstanding of how power actually works? Before we move further, do like and subscribe to my channel. It means a lot to me. Niccolò Machiavelli, perhaps the most misunderstood political philosopher in history, saw through the comforting lies we tell ourselves about power, success, and human nature. He recognized that society operates not according to how we wish it would, but according to unchangeable laws of human behavior that few have the courage to acknowledge. You may believe that honesty always prevails, that good intentions shield you from harm, that your inherent worth will eventually be recognized without you having to assert it. Meanwhile, your essence screams for the power and respect you deserve. But no one taught you how to claim it without compromising yourself. On the contrary, they taught you to remain humble, to wait your turn, to believe that the world is fundamentally fair. And so you become increasingly frustrated while the world rewards those who understand its true nature. This is where Machiavelli's wisdom becomes essential. For him, power does not come from wishful thinking, but from clear sight. It is not about becoming evil, but about seeing reality as it exists, not as we wish it to be. In Machiavelli's own words, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see you, to few to come in touch with you. In other words, your reality matters less than how others perceive it, and as long as you ignore this truth, you will remain powerless. This video is not for those who want comfortable platitudes about success. It is for those who sense they've been playing a game whose real rules have been kept from them, for those who feel they are capable of much more, but still hold a spark of hope that there is a path forward. And there is. But it starts with a brutal decision to stop believing in how the world should work and start understanding how it actually does. If you've made it this far, you may have already realized that the powerlessness you feel is not a personal failure. It is the absence of strategic awareness in your pursuit of what you truly desire. And it is time to change that. You've been told a lie your entire life. A comforting fiction that has kept you docile, predictable, and ultimately powerless. This lie is simple but devastating. That the world rewards goodness, that transparency leads to trust, that showing vulnerability creates connection, that playing fair means you'll be treated fairly in return. And as you navigate relationships, careers, and ambitions clinging to these beliefs, you become increasingly bewildered when reality doesn't match what you were promised. The cost of this misunderstanding isn't merely disappointment. It's the gradual erosion of your potential, the silent death of your ambitions, the quiet acceptance of circumstances far beneath what you could achieve. Machiavelli understood with brutal clarity that power is not bestowed upon the worthy. It is seized by those who understand its mechanics. When he wrote, "Men ought either to be well treated or crushed," he wasn't advocating cruelty. He was acknowledging a truth about human nature that most are too uncomfortable to face. From an early age, we are shaped to reject Machiavellian wisdom. We're taught to share everything, expose our intentions, prioritize being liked over being respected, and sacrifice strategic advantage for momentary approval. We grow up being instructed to be transparent, to avoid conflict, to believe that others will recognize our intrinsic value without us having to assert it. But no one teaches us to read the underlying motives of others, to recognize when we're being manipulated, to understand that perception carries more weight than reality. This absence of strategic thinking is not a coincidence, it's programmed. A society of strategic thinkers would be harder to predict, harder to influence, harder to control. This ignorance of power dynamics is why so many talented people remain permanently frustrated. You follow all the conventional wisdom about success, check all the boxes of socially approved behavior, but still feel out of place in the theater of power. You sense you're playing a game whose real rules have been deliberately obscured. What you're feeling is not paranoia, it's recognition. Recognition that the path to genuine influence requires understanding truths that polite society pretends don't exist. And this recognition, according to Machiavelli, is where true transformation begins. But society doesn't want you to realize this, because strategically naive people are easier to manage. They'll accept less than their worth, question authority less frequently, follow prescribed paths without resistance. They're useful, they're predictable, they're controllable. Machiavelli said that to gain power, the individual needs to see through these comfortable illusions. They need to understand how perception works, what motivates human behavior, what creates lasting influence rather than temporary approval. And this is uncomfortable knowledge, because it involves admitting that much of what you believed about success and influence was deliberately designed to keep you from achieving either. This is a painful truth, that you've been operating under rules designed for your containment, not your advancement. That you've shaped yourself according to principles that limit rather than liberate your potential. That you've been trained to fear the very strategies that would grant you the influence you deserve. But it's also the only way forward, because only by recognizing how power actually works can you begin to claim it for yourself. And this journey has a name: strategic awakening. The transformative process that Machiavelli believed to be the true path to becoming undefeated. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the specific principles that govern this awakening. How do the truly powerful see situations differently? What mental frameworks allow them to navigate challenges that defeat others? The answer requires both courage and clarity, but it begins with understanding a fundamental Machiavellian insight about human nature itself. At the heart of Machiavelli's wisdom lies a concept that revolutionizes how we understand success and failure: the dynamic interplay between virtue and fortuna. Virtue isn't virtue in the moral sense. It's effectiveness, competence, the capacity to assess situations accurately and respond appropriately. Fortuna is the unpredictable element of chance that influences all human affairs. Those who remain defeated in life misattribute their failures entirely to fortune while simultaneously failing to develop the virtue necessary to seize opportunities when they arise. Machiavelli wrote, "Fortune is a woman, and if you wish to keep her under, you must beat and ill-use her." This provocative metaphor isn't advocating violence. It's expressing that fortune favors boldness, decisiveness, and adaptation rather than passive acceptance. When opportunity appears, hesitation becomes your enemy. Consider how many chances you've watched slip away because you needed more time or more information. The undefeated don't wait for perfect conditions. They act while others deliberate, adapting their approach as circumstances change rather than clinging to rigid plans. This adaptability extends to how you present yourself. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. Machiavelli recognized that different situations require different aspects of your nature. The rigid commitment to a single way of being, always honest, always aggressive, always accommodating, creates predictability, and predictability creates vulnerability. Notice how those who wield true influence modulate their approach. They know when transparency builds advantage and when discretion preserves it. They recognize when boldness will be rewarded and when patience will yield greater returns. This flexibility isn't dishonesty, it's strategic intelligence. Most crucially, Machiavelli understood that humans respond more to appearances than to realities. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. This insight isn't an invitation to deception, but a recognition that perception management is not optional for those who seek to remain undefeated. How often have you seen a mediocre idea embraced because it was confidently presented, or watched a superior contribution ignored because its creator failed to establish credibility first? The world responds not to your intrinsic value, but to the value you appear to command. This brings us to perhaps his most controversial insight. It is far safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Fear in this context isn't terror, but a healthy recognition of consequences. Those who attempt to secure cooperation through affection alone discover its unreliability when interests diverge. Look at how often nice people are exploited, overlooked for promotions, or taken for granted. Their fundamental error isn't kindness itself, but failing to establish boundaries that command respect. They hope that appreciation will translate to fair treatment, a hope Machiavelli recognized as dangerously naive. The most profound element of Machiavellian wisdom isn't about manipulating others, but about understanding human nature with unflinching clarity. This understanding isn't cynical, it's liberating. It allows you to navigate complex human dynamics without being blindsided by behaviors that seem shocking only if you've accepted a sanitized version of reality. In the next part, we'll explore how these principles translate into practical strategies that can be applied to modern challenges. How do you build strategic alliances without becoming dependent on them? How do you recognize opportunities that others miss? The path to becoming undefeated requires more than theoretical understanding. It demands implementation. The distance between understanding Machiavelli's principles and applying them effectively lies in psychological mastery, both of yourself and your environment. This mastery begins with a skill few ever develop: reading situations accurately while others remain blinded by wishful thinking. When approaching any situation, most people immediately ask, "What should happen here?" The Machiavellian mind instead asks, "What is actually happening here?" This distinction seems subtle, but creates dramatic differences in outcomes. While others react to their hopes and expectations, you respond to reality. Pay attention to inconsistencies between what people say and what they do. Notice whose opinions carry weight in meetings, even when they lack formal authority. Observe who speaks confidently about subjects they clearly don't understand, yet remains unchallenged. These details reveal the actual power structure beneath the official one. Timing, knowing when to act and when to wait, separates the perpetually defeated from the strategically victorious. Machiavelli noted that opportunities must be seized at the precise moment they appear. The wise man does at once what the fool does finally. While others hesitate, gathering unnecessary consensus or waiting for non-existent perfect conditions, the window of advantage closes. Consider how often you've witnessed someone claim an opportunity simply because they moved decisively while others deliberated. Their success wasn't due to superior talent, but superior timing. They recognized the moment when action would be rewarded and hesitation punished. This heightened perception extends to managing how others see you. Most people believe reputation simply happens to them, the natural result of their actions observed fairly by others. The Machiavellian understands that perception requires cultivation. Men in general judge more by the eyes than by the hands. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few feel what you are. This insight is crucial. Your capabilities matter less than your demonstrated value. Notice how certain individuals position their contributions for maximum visibility while others work diligently in obscurity, wondering why their efforts go unrecognized. Strategic alliance building represents another dimension where psychological understanding determines outcomes. Most approach relationships asking, "Do I like this person?" The Machiavellian asks, "How do our interests align? What capabilities do they possess that complement my own?" This doesn't mean treating people as objects to be manipulated. Rather, it means recognizing that sustainable relationships must serve mutual benefit. When you understand what others truly value, not what they claim to value, you can create alliances that withstand the test of changing circumstances. Look at how often people invest in relationships that drain their resources without providing reciprocal advantage. They call these friendships or networking, but they're actually strategic liabilities, connections that take more than they give while offering little protection when fortunes change. The capacity to manage your own emotions represents, perhaps, the most critical psychological advantage. While others react impulsively to provocations, the strategically minded person asks, "Does an emotional response serve my objectives here?" This emotional discipline allows you to maintain clarity, while others become clouded by anger, fear, or excessive enthusiasm. Notice how often people sabotage their own interests through emotional reactions. They speak when silence would serve them better. They reveal vulnerabilities at precisely the wrong moment. They make enemies unnecessarily. Their emotions become liabilities that strategic rivals can easily exploit. In the final part, we'll examine how these Machiavellian principles can be integrated into a complete approach to becoming undefeated, not just in specific situations, but as a comprehensive life strategy. Because ultimately, the choice isn't whether to engage with power dynamics, but whether to engage with them consciously or remain at their mercy. There comes a moment when abstract understanding must transform into concrete action, when knowledge of Machiavellian principles must become embodied wisdom. This transformation begins with a fundamental question. Are you willing to see the world as it is, not as you wish it to be? Most will answer yes, while continuing to operate based on comforting illusions. They'll acknowledge power dynamics intellectually while emotionally rejecting the implications. This divided consciousness guarantees defeat. Integration requires accepting uncomfortable truths about human nature without becoming cynical or losing your own ethical center. Machiavelli himself wrote, "A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good." The key insight here isn't that you should abandon goodness, but that naive goodness without strategic awareness, becomes self-destructive in a complex world. True integration means developing what might be called a strategic consciousness, a heightened awareness that operates continuously rather than activated only during crises. This consciousness asks revealing questions. Who benefits from this situation? What unstated objectives might be driving this person's behavior? What would happen if I responded unexpectedly rather than reactively? Notice how the truly powerful maintain this consciousness effortlessly. They're rarely surprised by developments that shock others. They anticipate shifts in alliances before they occur. They recognize opportunities and challenges while others see only obstacles. This isn't paranoia, it's practice perception. The mindset shift required is profound. Most people experience power as something external, something possessed by others and perpetually beyond their reach. The Machiavellian understands that power begins with perception, specifically your perception of yourself and the situation at hand. When you enter environments convinced of your powerlessness, you unconsciously signal weakness. You hesitate when you should act decisively. You seek unnecessary permission. You telegraph uncertainty. Others respond not to your capabilities, but to these signals, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of diminishment. Breaking this cycle requires a decision that only you can make, to stop perceiving yourself as a passive recipient of circumstances and start recognizing yourself as an active participant in creating them. This isn't magical thinking, it's strategic reality. Look at those who maintain influence regardless of formal position or resources. They've mastered the ability to create leverage where others see none. They've developed the capacity to make themselves valuable in changing circumstances. Most importantly, they refuse to internalize limitations that exist only in perception. The final component of Machiavellian integration is perhaps the most challenging: maintaining ethical integrity while acknowledging strategic realities. The common misreading of Machiavelli portrays him as advocating immorality when he was actually describing the mechanics of power with unusual honesty. You can maintain your core values while still engaging strategically with the world. In fact, strategic awareness often better serves genuine ethical commitments than naive idealism. The strategically minded philanthropist accomplishes more good than the idealistic but ineffective one. The strategically aware reformer changes more systems than the passionate but tactically ignorant activist. So now I ask you, what power have you been denying yourself? What strategic awareness have you been avoiding? What truth about your situation have you refused to acknowledge? Share your thoughts below. It doesn't matter if it's a realization, a question, or a commitment. The act of articulating it represents the first step toward strategic consciousness, the first move toward becoming truly undefeated. And if this video resonated with you, if some part of it illuminated a dynamic you've sensed but couldn't name, then you need to watch the next video. Not because it's a continuation, but because if you've recognized these truths, you're ready to go even deeper into the practical application of strategic wisdom. The choice is now yours. Continue living according to comforting fictions about how power works, or embrace the clarity that comes from seeing reality without illusion. Because in the words of Machiavelli himself, where the willingness is great, the difficulties cannot be great. If you've followed this journey through Machiavellian wisdom, you've already taken the first crucial step that separates the strategically aware from those who remain perpetually defeated. You've chosen to see power dynamics as they truly exist rather than how conventional wisdom portrays them. Most people crave influence, but few are willing to face what attaining it truly requires. Because, contrary to what conventional wisdom suggests, genuine power doesn't come from following prescribed formulas or mimicking surface behaviors of successful people. It comes from a fundamental shift in how you perceive yourself and the world around you. Machiavelli understood that those who remain perpetually defeated do so not from lack of intelligence or opportunity, but from a persistent refusal to acknowledge certain fundamental truths about human nature. His infamous line, "Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions," wasn't written to encourage deception, but to warn against the vulnerability that comes from naivety. The undefeated person isn't one who never faces setbacks. They're the one who extracts wisdom from every challenge and refuses to be defined by temporary failures. They understand that each situation contains hidden leverage if viewed with sufficient clarity. Each relationship carries strategic potential when approached with awareness rather than unconscious emotional patterns. This perspective isn't cold calculation. It's enlightened self-interest that actually enables more authentic connections. When you understand others' motivations rather than projecting idealized versions onto them, you can engage with who they truly are instead of being perpetually disappointed by the gap between expectation and reality. The ultimate Machiavellian insight isn't about manipulating others, but about liberating yourself from manipulation, from social conditioning that keeps you operating below your potential, from self-limiting beliefs disguised as virtue, from strategic blindness presented as moral superiority. Your transformation begins with a single, powerful choice to step fully into strategic consciousness instead of drifting between moments of clarity and prolonged periods of willful blindness. To recognize that the world responds not to your intentions, but to your actions, not to your potential, but to your demonstrated value, not to your hopes, but to your strategic positioning. I want you to answer one question honestly. What strategic truth have you been avoiding that, if embraced, would transform your effectiveness? Write it below. The act of articulating it will begin breaking its unconscious power over you. Remember that in a world that obscures the true nature of power, simply seeing clearly becomes your greatest advantage. As Machiavelli himself wrote, the first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him. By choosing to develop strategic consciousness, you've already separated yourself from those who prefer comfortable illusions to empowering truths. The path ahead isn't easy, but as you've now discovered, it's the only one that leads to genuine, sustainable power. And it begins not with controlling others, but with mastering yourself. Would you like me to explain or break down this revised version?